Chapter 5 of Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, and things are really heating up now. Chapter 5 is called The Climax of the Danconians. So what happens in Chapter 5 is Dagny's pretty upset. She wants to go and see what's going on with Francisco d'Anconia because the mines have just been nationalized. And everybody was really counting on his expertise to pull copper out of those mines and produce copper for everybody. But now that the mines have been nationalized, what's happened is the government has found out that Francisco d'Anconia had not found any copper. There was no copper in those mines. So it was all BS. And the chapter starts out with Eddie Willers and Dagny talking. And Eddie says, his voice low, Francisco is not a fool. Whatever else he may be, no matter what depravity he's sunk to, and I've given up trying to figure out why, he is not a fool. He couldn't have made a mistake of this kind. It is not possible. I don't understand it. And Dagny says, I'm beginning to. So basically, she starts to walk over to the Wayne Falkland Hotel where Francisco is, d'Anconia is. And on her way, we start to go deeper into their childhood, how they knew Francisco growing up. And we start to see a different side of d'Anconia. Like Eddie said, he is not a fool. This guy knows what he's doing. So it says, Francisco found it natural that the Taggart children should be chosen as his companions. They were the crown heirs of Taggart Transcontinental, as he was of d'Anconia Copper. We are the only aristocracy left in the world, the aristocracy of money, he said to Dagny once. He was 14. It's the only real aristocracy if people understood what it means, which they don't. So d'Anconia is saying, listen, you know, we are the privileged class of people who kind of rules. You know, we're the people who control society, and that's a good thing. You know, he's proud of that. And so you get the sense now, and we begin to understand that d'Anconia knows the Taggarts. He spent his summers there, at least 1 month every summer. He would go and spend it with the Taggarts. So he wasn't really that good of friends with James Taggart, but he became really good friends with Eddie Willers, and he became really good friends with Dagny. The reason my family has lasted for such a long time is that none of us has ever been permitted to think he is born a d'Anconia. We are expected to become one. I really love that quote. I even wrote it here in the book that I love that quote. That you don't just get to inherit your family name when you're at that level. That you actually have to show that you can produce, that you can do what the rest of his family did and at least add 10% to your fortune. And we find out later in the chapter that d'Anconia wants to add 100% to his fortune. He's a really ambitious kid. So we get a little bit of background like we did in previous chapters about Nat Taggart and the guy who he was the grandfather of Dagny, and he founded Taggart Transcontinental. And now we get a little bit of background on Sebastian d'Anconia. And so Sebastian d'Anconia kind of gets insulted or whatever at this party by a member of the Inquisition, and he gets offended. He's in Spain and he goes off to Central America, or he goes off to Argentina, and he builds this business. And then 15 years later, he sends for the girl he loves. So we see here that, you know, d'Anconia's grandfather was no bum. I mean, he made something of himself. He worked in the mines, he owned it, and then he went and sent for the girl that he loved that he left in Spain because they were going to come round him up because he wasn't too happy with the members of the Inquisition and such. And we get a nice little picture of how every summer Dagny and Eddie Willers would run to greet Francisco, and they'd race to this birch tree. And D'Anconia would always beat them. And so D'Anconia called Dagny Slug. He would say, "Hi, Slug." And Dagny would reply, "Hi, Frisco," which is just like a sort of bastardizing his name or something. And so we really get a glimpse of the fact that there's a closeness between these characters now. And it gets pretty exciting from here. And while D'Anconia is staying with them, and he knows it's Dagny's ambition to work on the railroad when she grows up, he decides he's going to go and he's going to sneak away. And despite the child labor laws, he's going to fake his way on and get a job as a call boy on the railroad. Well, Miss Taggart finds out about this, the mom, and she goes and gets him because he's been sneaking off. And when he goes, she finds out that he's been like doing the most amazing work out of all the people that they have there. The dispatcher was sorry to lose him. "Frankie," he said, "was the best call boy they had ever had. I'd sure like to keep him on. Maybe we could make a deal with his parents," he suggested. "I'm afraid not," said Miss Taggart. So Dagny and Eddie spent their winters trying to master some new skill in order to astonish Francisco and beat him. So there's that astonishment again, right? There's something to being able to fill someone with wonder and surprise, to be able to surprise somebody, to be able to fill someone with wonder is something special. And Dagny has it. She's always doing it to others, but Francisco has it. And he's the guy that's astonishing her. He's the guy that's astonishing Dagny and Eddie. And so they paint the picture of just how good he is at pretty much everything. And it says here that Francisco could do anything he undertook. His attitude was not, "I can do it better than you," but simply, "I can do it." And what he meant by doing was doing superlatively. So of the highest order and quality, surpassing everybody else who has ever done it, so to speak. And so this guy, he's not, necessarily being a jerk about it. He's just like, "I can do it." It's about me, almost competing with myself, which is very high quality to have, right? To be able to compete with yourself, to be able to want to prove, not just prove, but wanting to accomplish it. So Miss Taggart said once that, "I'm sure that Francisco will change his family crest to 'What for?'" Two things were impossible to him, D'Anconia: to stand still or to move aimlessly. So he always wanted to know what he was doing something for, right? Story of my life. That's why I never did my homework in school, right? Because I want to know why am I doing it? What is it? How does this relate to what I want to accomplish in the world? And what am I getting out of doing this? How does it practically apply? And so D'Anconia was the same way. He's like, "I want to know why this applies to my life. I want to know how this applies to my life." And we discover that D'Anconia's, motto is pretty much, "I can do it." And he can do it. Everything he puts his mind to. "When I run Taggart Transcontinental," Dagny would say at times. "When I run D'Anconia Copper," said Francisco. They never had to explain the rest to each other. They knew each other's goals and motives. "Francisco," Eddie asked him once as he stood by the tracks of Taggart Station, "you've been just about everywhere in the world. What's the most important thing on earth?" "This," answered Francisco, pointing to the emblem TT on the front of an engine. He added, "I wish I could have met Nat Taggart." And we found out earlier that Nat Taggart is like Dagny's religious figure. Dagny looks at her ancestors the way, a Christian might look at Jesus, or, something to that degree. And we find out that Danconia's been running, studying mineralogy and studying copper mills and mines and learning all the different business systems. They say like people who are going to be owners of stuff, they don't just learn their job, they learn everybody's job. So once they learn each job, this way they know how the whole business operates, how it all links together. And Danconia's in training, so he's eager to learn every single thing he can, master it, and then move on. So they grow up a little bit. They get to be like 16 or something. Their lives start moving more and more towards their destinies, towards their future. And then he comes back to visit, and they're a little older. And it says he too stood looking at her for a moment. And it seemed to her that it was not a look of greeting after an absence, but the look of someone who had thought of her every day of that year. Danconia says, I wish you'd learn to run faster. I'll always have to wait for you. Will you wait for me? She asked gaily. He answered without smiling, always. So, he hits her with the Professor Snape way before Professor Snape. You can start to see the romance forming between Dagny and Francisco. And just a few things that I underlined to illustrate the relationship between Danconia and Dagny and their viewpoints. Dagny asks, Francisco, what's the most depraved type of human being? The man without a purpose. And I wrote here, so true, right? It's terrible when you see people, I don't know what I want to do. I don't know what I want to do. They're just, aimlessly wandering around all the time. They never have any sense of direction. Later on, they're spending time with each other, and we get this line right here. She did not want to look at Francisco. She felt that his presence seemed more intensely real when she kept her eyes away from him, almost as if the stressed awareness of herself came from him, like the sunlight from the water. And I just wrote there that was fucking awesome. They start to paint this picture of how they're like reflections of each other, that she becomes aware of herself through his presence. And I think this is what's cool about the astonishment factor, that he's somebody who astonishes her, that he is the person that she's been looking for, that pumps her up, that gets her blood flowing when she's been around all these boring people. So Danconia says something really cool. He has this nice long quote. He said, Dagny, there's nothing of any importance in life except how well you do your work. Only that. Whatever else you are will come from that. It's the only measure of human value. All the codes of ethics they'll try to ram down your throat are just so much paper money put out by swindlers to fleece people of their virtues. The code of competence is the only system of morality that's on a gold standard. When you grow up, you'll know what I mean. That is just powerful shit. The code of competence is the only system of morality that's on a gold standard. So it's like, screw all these people who are like, human need, this, that, the other thing. It's like, can you produce or can't you? Can you be skilled? Do you have skills? Do you have something to offer, or don't you? What are you making of yourself, and what are you making for the world around you? Are you able to produce or not? And that's the gold standard. You get a real idea that Francisco is not freaking screwing around. And you just get really amped up reading this shit, because you're like, yes, that's what I'm talking about. Competence, right? And then Dagny says, I always get A's. Do you suppose I should try to get D's for a change and become the most popular girl in school? Francisco stopped, looked at her, and slapped her face. So this gets like raw, right? It's real emotional, powerful moment. She jokes around with him, and he gets serious and smacks her right across the face. She knew that she would have killed any other person who struck her, She felt the violent fury which would have given her the strength for it, and as a violent pleasure that Francisco had done it. She felt pleasure from the dull, hot pain in her cheek, and from the taste of blood in the corner of her mouth. She felt pleasure in what she suddenly grasped about him, about herself, and about his motive. Don't ever do that again. Don't crack jokes of that kind, he said. When you grow up, you'll understand what sort of unspeakable thing you said. She said, I understand it now. So wow, right? So here he is, not messing around. He's like, you don't even joke about screwing around and wasting your effort and your energy on things so nonsensical, so baseless, right? And Danconia is just letting her know, like, to even joke around about that, to even think about lowering yourself and your standard for a minute is just such a disgrace. And that is like, you get a real insight into Danconia. If you don't really like Danconia after this chapter, I really don't know what's going on in your head. So when she came home, she told her mother that she had cut her lip by falling against a rock. It was the only lie she ever told. She did not do it to protect Francisco. She did it because she felt, for some reason, which she could not define, that the incident was a secret too precious to share. So wow, so she's wanting to keep these intimate moments between them, these powerful emotional moments. It was like she could have lied to protect the guy, but her reasoning for it was to protect the intimacy that they shared, to not ruin it by allowing somebody else into that moment. You might like to know, she said, that I have a job on the railroad night operator at Rockdale. So they grew up, they got jobs. He says, all right, Taggart Transcontinental. Now it's a race. Let's see who will do greater honor, you to Nat Taggart or I to Sebastian Danconia. So honoring their grandfathers. Who's going to do more? Who's going to give more? So we get into a different side of Dagny after that. And her mother wants to dress her up and, have her coming out party, give her a debut, a formal entrance into society. And she thinks Dagny's not going to be into it, but Dagny gets into it. She's like, yes, I want to do that. I want to be introduced to society. She gets amped up. She says, mother, so she's having a good time. She's there. She's all excited. She's in this dress, like puffy white cloud that looks like she's floating in. And she's really elegant, and people find out, wow, she's actually beautiful when she wants to be. And then something happens throughout the night, and she gets, she's like done. She just fades off. And her mother's like, what the heck? I was so excited. My daughter was finally into colors and music and dressing up beautiful, and she was seeing more to life than just running a railroad and that type of stuff. And she's sitting, sort of reflecting later on. Her mother comes in, and Dagny asked her mother, do they think it's exactly in reverse? She asked. What? Asked Miss Taggart, bewildered. The things you were talking about, the lights and the flowers, do they expect those things to make them romantic, not the other way around? Darling, what do you mean? Her mother said. There wasn't a person there who enjoyed it, she said, her voice lifeless, or who thought or felt anything at all. They moved about and they said the same dull things they say anywhere. I suppose they thought the lights would make it brilliant. And I was like, wow, what a take, huh? That it's actually the people who are supposed to make things romantic, and it's actually the people who are supposed to make things to fill it with excitement and to fill it with life. And when people are just expecting the lights to do the job, when they're just floating around in the atmosphere, it's sort of like does nothing. And she felt that, and it turned her off because she expected to be with a different class of people who appreciated the beauty that was around them, the types of people who would create that beauty. Instead, she found that they weren't the people who create it. They're just the kind of people who soak it up, almost like use it until it's gone. And then she's working, and Danconia comes in, and you can tell that things are starting to get heated. They're older now. There's like a sexual tension building between them, and you're just like, are they going to do it? Is this stuff going to happen? And she's painting the scene, but first they play tennis, and she really tries to beat him, and they paint more symbolism. It was as if her will had vanished and someone's power were playing for her. It was not her pain that she felt over her body, but his. So there's a mirror symbolism. They're playing tennis. She's trying to exhaust him and she's feeling his pain. And there's like a real deep sense that they mirror each other, sort of like an anima and an animus, right? And then he comes and picks her up at work and they walk home together. And it's like I said, the sexual tension's kind of rising. And you could tell something's going to happen. And Ayn Rand uses this awesome language. She said, old ruts overgrown with grass made human presence seem more distant, adding the distance of years to the distance of miles, which I thought was awesome. So they're going to this, they're getting away from the present time. They're going into their own sort of reality because they're walking on this track, and she uses old ruts overgrown with grass. So new life, a fertility. But these old ruts, which ruts are like made by wheels going over the ground. And obviously this track hadn't been used in a while in the woods. And then a rut is also breeding season for animals. So she kind of plays on words in a very cool way. She's like the rut of the, where wheels go industry, but now that's been worked over and grass is now grown and things are becoming fertile and nature's taking it back. And then they get to this clearing and he held her, pressing the length of his body against hers with a tense, purposeful insistence, his hand moving over her breast as if he were learning a proprietor's intimacy with her body. So proprietor is somebody who has ownership over a property. A shocking intimacy that needed no consent from her, no permission. She tried to pull herself away, but she only leaned back against his arms long enough to see his face and his smile, the smile that told her she had given him permission long ago. So, wow. Then, they really like powerful stuff. They've kind of had this soulmate level connection, it seems, for quite a while. And it was only natural that they would explore intimacy with each other first. And then they just go on like love making summer, and then they meet up for years, making love at different times, not seeing each other for a year and then seeing each other again a year after. It says he had started working at the foundry as a furnace boy when he was 16, and now at 20 he owned it. He acquired the first title of property with the aid of some inaccuracy about his age. On the day when he received his university diploma, and he sent them both to his father. So he bought a property and graduated college. Well, he bought a mine, bought a copper business, and graduated college all at the same time. Sends that to his dad, and his dad's like, where'd you get the money for the payment on that property? And he says, by playing the New York stock market. His dad's like, what? Who taught you to do that? He says, it's not difficult to judge which industrial ventures will succeed and which won't. So he's really ambitious, and he's going to take over his father's business. And one day he comes to see Dagny after certain years had passed. And he says, there's something wrong in the world. There always has been. Something no one has ever named or explained. He would not tell her what it was. So that is the first hint that something's wrong. He's experienced something since he's gone out into the world. And all this beautiful joy that he has for being productive, he starts to see that there's something else at work here, something less pure, apparently. And it's kind of eating at him. But after he makes that statement, he pretends like it didn't happen. And then they meet up again, and it says, as if he had lost the ability to smile and was astonished that he should regain it. So he's being sort of tortured with something, inflicted with intense pain, right? By whatever he's found out about the world, by whatever he's seen that nobody's been talking about, this evil. And that's obviously linked to like the communism and the fact that people don't value production and people are playing a different game than competence. That the value is about almost destroying the human element of creator and producer and devaluing it almost. So clearly something's been weighing on him, and they're together in the hotel room one night, and he says, Dagny, what would you say if I asked you to leave Taggart Transcontinental and let it go to hell, as it will when your brother takes over? She says, what would I say if you asked me to consider the idea of committing suicide? She answered angrily. And he's like, yeah, forget it, you know. But clearly something's got him thinking that, you know, maybe it's better if we just don't even bother. You know, maybe I'm seeing something here that makes me think that it's just not worth your time to even bother with this. And Dagny doesn't really know what it is yet. So he says, Dagny, help me to remain, to refuse, even though he's right. And we don't know who he is. She asked evenly, to refuse what, Francisco? She says, what is it, Francisco? He says, I can't tell you. He says, you're not ready to hear it. She says, you said to help you refuse. He said, I can't refuse. So there's something is, he's been made an offer he can't refuse, or something's happening where he can't refuse to stay with his company and build it the way he has to build it. But he doesn't like it because he has to play a game he doesn't want to play. So he's really stressed out and everything. And he says, will you forgive me? So this is all you can do for me, will you? And she says, yes, Francisco. And he answered later on, he says, I don't know. Don't wait for me, Dagny. Next time we meet, you will not want to see me. I will have a reason for the things I'll do, but I can't tell you the reason, and you will be right to damn me. I am not committing the contemptible act of asking you to take me on faith. You have to live by your own knowledge and judgment. You will damn me. You will be hurt. Try not to let it hurt you too much. Remember that I told you this and that it was all I could tell you. So he warns her that he's going to have to do some stuff that she's not going to like. And this is really their last moment together before he really disappears for quite a while, 10 years to be exact. So, and then it skips back to her going to the hotel room and how she's dealt with pain for the last 10 years over this, over what he's sunk to, over the depravity. And so he's going to become basically this playboy, throwing parties and, you know, doing crazy, nutty stuff with broads and all that other stuff, right? So, and she can't really believe that that's who he is and what he would do. But in the meantime, he does make money. He's smart. What he touches turns to gold until now. So, in dealing with her sort of torment over the situation, she says pain and ugliness are never to be taken seriously, she thinks. So, that's kind of her thing. She's like, I'm not going to let this stuff cripple me. So, she goes to the Wayne Falkland Hotel where D'Anconia is staying to witness the farce, right? Now we know the farce is the nationalization of the mines and how he was BSing. There was no copper in those mines, and he's been outed. So she's going to confront him now at the hotel. And they say that he has a style made of gauntness. And gaunt describes Reardon too. So they use gauntness, the same words to describe Reardon, who Dagny's sort of got something going on with, but not really yet. And they use the same words to describe D'Anconia. So there's clearly a link between Dagny and Reardon, Dagny, D'Anconia. They kind of bring out similar feelings. They have the same type of aesthetic, but in different ways. His face was open, its rapid changes of expression reflecting whatever he felt, as if he had nothing to hide. The blue eyes were still and changeless, never giving a hint of what he thought. So he's open with his feelings, but he's closed off. He doesn't give away. He's got a poker face when it comes to his thoughts. So Dagny goes in and confronts this guy. She's like, when you told those reporters that you came to New York to witness the farce, which farce did you mean? He says, that's what I like about you, Dagny. There are several million people in the city of New York. At present, out of 7 million people, you're the only one to whom it could have occurred that I wasn't talking about the veiled divorce scandal, because he was involved with a married woman. And so or that it was supposed that he was. They had reported that he was. And obviously now we know that's not the farce he came to witness. She says, because you knew they'd seize those stock mines sooner or later. What you were after is your American stockholders. He says, that's true. That's part of the truth. It's not all I was after. She says, what else? He says, that's for you to figure out. So it says, she says, they thought it was safe to ride on. Oh, no, sorry. Danconia says, they thought it was safe to ride on my brain because they assumed that the goal of my journey was wealth. All their calculations rested on the premise that I wanted to make money. What if I didn't? If you didn't, what did you want? He says, they never asked me what I want. They didn't inquire about my aims, my motives, or my desires. And that was an essential part of their theory. So their theory was, let's not do any work. Let's just let Danconia lead us to the promised land. So then they hint a little bit more at still the sexual tension between them, the ownership of his body by her, and she says, unaccountably by an association of feeling that astonished her, she remembered what had conveyed to her recently the same sense of consummate joy as his. So again, Danconia and the feeling surrounding him is astonishing. So we get this whole crazy stuff happening. Danconia is sort of revealing part of his plan as Dagny's asking him what's going on. He's kind of just being straight with her. And he says, the government of the People's State of Mexico to blame the depravity of the rich because I turned out to be an irresponsible playboy instead of the greedy capitalist I was expected to be. So basically, he buys a mine for 15 million. He buys mines and mountains for 15 million. They give him a 200-year contract saying we're not going to nationalize for at least 200 years. They give the same thing to Taggart Transcontinental. They nationalize, find out there's no copper in the mines that Danconia paid for, and then they're upset at him and blame him because there's no copper there, because he wasn't a greedy capitalist, because he just bought a worthless hunk of junk. So then she questions them further. She says, Francisco, if you see what's happened in the world, if you understand all the things you said, you can't laugh about it. You of all men, you should fight them. And he said, whom? She says, the looters and those who make world looting possible, the Mexican planners and their kind. No, my dear, it's you that I have to fight, he says. So she's like, holy shit, what do you mean now we're enemies? What are you trying to say? And Danconia says, by the standards of our time, the man who has the least to offer is the man who wins. So Danconia's figured out that there's a different game being played. And that is how this communist game is played, right? The person who has the least to offer is the person who's going to win. It's let's take the resources, let's give them to other people. It's not about competence anymore. So he's like, they're afraid of production. They're afraid of that. So why am I going to have that? I'm going to offer the least and make the most, which makes sense. So he really lets her know what's going on. And then Dagny hits him with what about your ancestors? What about bringing them honor and, all this stuff? And he says, my ancestors had a remarkable ability for making the right investments. Of course, investment is a relative term. It depends on what you wish to accomplish. For instance, look at San Sebastian. It cost me $15 million, but these 15 million wiped out 40 million belonging to Taggart Transcontinental, 35 million belonging to stockholders such as James Taggart and Orrin Boyle, and hundreds of millions which will be lost in secondary consequences. That's not a bad return on an investment, is it, Dagny? And then he goes on. First, I don't think the Taggart Transcontinental will recover from its loss on that preposterous San Sebastian line. You think it will, but it won't. Second, the San Sebastian helped your brother James to destroy the Phoenix Durango, which was about the only good railroad left anywhere. And she's like, whoa, you realize all this? And he says, a great deal more. She says, do you know Ellis Wyatt? And he says, sure. She says, do you know what this might do to him? And this is the guy producing all the goods coming out of Colorado. He says, Yes, he's the one who's going to be wiped out next. And she says, do you find that amusing? He says, much more amusing than the ruin of the Mexican planners. So, whoa. So here we have Danconia is like trying to wipe everybody off the map. For what reason? I don't know. Because how does it benefit him if there's just no more industry like left? But at the same time, it's almost like he's like, I realize the game you're playing, and now I'm going to. It's to ultimately destroy yourself. So I'm going to be the one who does it. If you want to do it, then I'll take it to the extreme almost. It seems right. I will. I'll show you how ugly this game really is, if that's the game you want to play. And she says, why? She repeated. And he says, you're not ready to hear it. And then that kind of calms down. And he says, I still want to sleep with you, but I'm not a man who is happy enough to do it. And he says, you want it too, don't you? And she says, yes, but it doesn't matter what I want or that I want it. So that's kind of where the chapter ends. Gets pretty crazy when you hear Danconia's background and how competent he is, how all the amazing stuff. I mean, you have to read it, but all the amazing stuff the guy does, all how good he is at what he does, and then to find out that he's, trying to take everybody, down and sort of win, but do it in this way. It's pretty interesting. I don't really now fault him. It's like he's playing the game he has to play to win. And I'm not really sure what his true motive is yet. They didn't reveal it, but it seems almost like he's just doing it to bust everybody's balls. But I mean, do it in a way that produces for him. Like, I'm going to take you down and then I'm going to benefit and then I'll control everything. I don't know. Very interesting. So we're going to see what happens in chapter 6.